So, Lee, I believe at the end of that period, you went into boot. What do you call them? Black boots.
The black boots,
The
yes.
black boots, the support unit, and I believe you have some stories in that field as well.
Yeah. Before I move on there, Tony, I'd just like to tell your viewers that the dog section had five dogs killed in action during the time, and two dog handlers, and a number of handlers were actually wounded. And funny enough, dog handlers tended to be more on the rebel side of life. And if you went to dog section, you didn't go there looking for promotion, because you weren't going to get it in RA, because they weren't too popular with the powers that be. But moving on to the unit, in early Feb, I applied to go to the unit. They actually didn't want to let me go from dogs, but I forced their hand a little bit. And eventually I ended up in the unit. But the problem was that the troop commander's course that they had on the go had 1 day to run. So I wasn't going to do any troop commander's course, so I was actually sent straight to the field to join a troop called Juliet Troop. For those people that don't know, the support unit at that time was made up of about 30 odd troops, and there were about 30 to 35 men per troop, a troop commander, and probably about 30 to 35 men per troop. They had the usual. In fact, it was like an infantry setup, because they had MOGs. We actually had radios this time. We had MOGs, we had medics, and trackers, so it was quite organised. Anyhow, I went to Juliet Troop, which was then down in Nyanga area, where I met up with an ex-dog section guy that was the troop commander, Saki Makai. Saki was also ex-dogs, and had been in dogs actually before I went to dogs. I did about 2 weeks there, and then the troop fortunately went on R&R, so we came out of there. Next deployment we went on was to a base called 151 Alpha, which was a unit base just outside Rhodesia on a farm, where instead of one troop being based up there was 3 to 4 troops based up there, and we had a superintendent, unit superintendent, by the name of Fred Mason, who was in charge of that base and ran it most of the time. He was a very flamboyant guy, a lovely guy. Loved his troops. Kept visiting them in the field. He got ambushed a couple of times, but basically a good guy that actually looked after his troops. Number of people used to refer to him as Bull Cream Fred, which I thought was a bit mean, because he might have used Bull Cream, but he was a good bloody officer. Anyhow, this base, actually the whole troop, all the troop had to deploy. And in the Rhodesia area, it was ideal for OPs, because they've got giant granite koppies overlooking crawl lines and this type of thing. And the Rhodesia area was an area through which a lot of tours actually passed on their way to other areas. And they used a very, very large granite koppie as a sort of a marking point, so that when they were marching, they could march towards this thing. I did a lot of OPs in that area, but one day one of the call signs from another troop had some tours visual. There was no fire force available, and the next day they had another group of tours visual. So Fred decided that he would send the whole of Juliet Troop, and we were to sweep the area, in the chance that we could actually flush them. So we went as a troop. I on the right hand of with my call sign, and we were moving through bush towards up a slight copy. A lot of bush around. When my troop MAG gunner saw movement, opened fire, and in actual fact hit this guy, which I'm still not sure today whether he was a Tur or a Majiba, but probably a Majiba. We advanced further forward, spoke to this guy, and whilst we were talking to him, that funny sound you hear, as a mortar leaves the tube. Well, that's what we heard. Unfortunately, you must have heard a few of those.
Very familiar with that. Yeah.
Anyhow, it fortunately went over our heads and landed very close to where Saki Makai was with his section, and so we left the wounded Mujiba on his own because he wasn't going anywhere, and advanced towards where the sound came from. We'd gone probably about 200 yards, and all of a sudden it was like confetti raining down on your head. There's this bloody noise, and these Turs opened fire on us. We returned fire, and we advanced to contact because we couldn't see anything. That I think is probably one of the worst things in the bush is you can't see your bloody enemy until you're right on top of it, and that's the scary part. And a lot of guys couldn't handle that. But you quickly overcame that. Anyhow, we advanced and we had another small firefight. We actually wounded one guy who subsequently died before we got to him. But he was quite a heavy. He had probably about 200, 300 dollars, some dollars, and Rhodesian dollars, sorry, on him, and he had a folding butt AK, so he was quite a heavy. He also had a stick grenade, which the half of the stick part of it had been blown off, so I had to bury it and leave it there. And we that was as an aside. We actually started to carry on to advance to see whether we could make contact with some more, but Saki had actually called in Fire Force. So Fire Force came, and it was RLI, but they got out of the area before they arrived. So from their point of view, it was a bit of a lemon. They came from Grand Reef. In fact, the Fire Forces all came from Grand Reef for us in that area. And it would be RLI, RAL, RR on occasion. So you actually met lots of different people in the bush from different units jumping out of different helicopters. But anyhow, that was Juliet's first kill. So we put this guy, the body, and the other guy who subsequently died, and they went back in the chopper with all the kit and everything, and we went back to base because we weren't going to find any more Turs in the area because they must have escaped. And that night we went to the Rhodesia Hotel, and we had a super steak, egg, and chips, all at the expense of that particular. And next morning, Saki was called in by CID wanting to know why we were handing blood-stained money across to the hotel in payment for this food that we were eating. So Saki actually explained the story, and we made sure too that our African troops had a good BSAP that night. And the strange thing in the unit was they were all dry camps. You actually weren't allowed to drink in the bush in your camp or anything like that. So that was a first for them, and they really enjoyed that. I must have studied the night sky so many times lying in OP on rocky ground. It was unreal. One thing I really missed on OP was you had no green stuff to eat. You had no vegetables, except you just had this tinned muck. And for those that don't know, the support unit actually weren't supplied with food. You actually bought your own food. So you were given an allowance per person per day for that food. So you supplied your own food, which in a lot of ways was ideal because the unit was totally self-contained. Each troop had its own vehicles, its own radios, its own ammo, its houses, its tents, and its fridges and gas and all that type of jazz. So it could move at a moment's notice, which made it quite a successful unit from that point of view. It didn't rely upon a train at all.
Where did you buy the food from? And ditto for the African soldiers, were they disciplined enough to go and get their own food?
Hell yes, if they didn't buy their own food, they starved. and so did we. You eventually learned that you don't carry a lot of food for a 6-day OP or 5-day OP because it's bloody hard to carry. And walking into OPs was quite interesting because you actually dropped off quite a ways from the OP. Like when I mean quite a ways, like 10 Ks, 15 Ks sometimes. So you would walk to these granite gomos or hills or whatever, and you would have to anti-track most of the way so that the Mujibas, the terrorists, lookouts, actually couldn't find your spoor during the day. And I'm sure that a lot of OPs were actually found out that way. And making comms with your base wasn't generally a problem in that area because you were up quite high. And we were then carrying, I think it was a TR-76 radios or something like that, similar to the Army ones, which were quite light. And we didn't.
TR-48 was the big heavy bucket.
Yeah, we never got to those TR.
Then you had the A-76, A-73.
That's the one, yeah. A-76s we had, Wave 73, and we had the TR-28s, which was the old-fashioned one of the one you're talking about. So we didn't need those things at all in that era. SP went back to base and we did more OPs or whatever. And SP in the form of John Padbury, actually John wrote a book called The Battle for Urungwe, I think it was called, and published it. He was SP in Rhodesia, and he got some information that a lot of TERs were gathering in this particular area. So we deployed. I'd really become the troop commander of Juliet for quite some time back, and so I deployed with the whole troop, and we climbed into various OPs in and around the area. And the one morning, I was woken up and bloody told that my sergeant major, who was on another OP, wanted to speak to me. So I spoke to him, and he said, Isha, they are flocking down the Gomos. They are flocking. So I said, who's flocking? He said, all these TERs, Isha. So I said, how many TERs? He said, 20, 30, 40 TERs. Flocking, Isha, he said. So we said, fine, okay, let's see if we can pick them up and call Fire Force. Fire Force actually wasn't available. So somebody made a decision that I must move 2 call signs, myself included, and try and intercept these flocking. So we flocked ourselves down this bloody hill.
I'm glad you're putting the letter L in that.
Yes, yeah. Down these hills, and I was with my call sign. There were 6 of us in the call signs. It was quite a large call sign because I was in it, and we were extended line crossing open field, and we got ambushed by about 10, 15. I think about 15 TERs who obviously saw us coming, which was obviously part of the group that my sergeant major saw. And I lost a sergeant, Sergeant Paul Mishumbwe, at that time. He was shot and killed during that firefight. I carried on tracking and joined up with another one of my sections, and so we were about 11 men now, and we carried on, slept up for the night, carried on tracking the next day, and just before lunchtime, we had a contact with this group who had ambushed us, and we managed to kill 2 of them. And that was a sad loss of quite a good sergeant. But that was war, I suppose.
Terrible.
So we in the unit used to do 6 weeks in the bush, 10 days out in R&R, and another week at either retraining or battle camp, because the unit had its own battle camp, which was interesting, a very good battle camp, because it was all live ammunition. So they had MAGs and everything was live, and mounted MAGs and fixed what's his name. So I hated that bloody battle camp, because they kept on making us want to run, and I hated running. So you had to run here, and you had to run there. And I think I was 36 then, and I had enough of this running. So, sorry, 35. So we did battle camp there, and retraining, and then you went back to the bush. In those days, unless you went to a base like 151 Alpha, and we had another one at Shabani with 3 troops, then you went and you based up yourself on as a troop on your own. So next one of the deployments, I went to Windsor TTL. I went to Windsor TTL was not a particularly nice TTL, because there was a lot of TERS in the area, and a number of people actually got ambushed and lost their lives in that particular area. We had some successful contacts there. We called in Fire Force twice, and they got some kills from our OPs. So that was quite good. At that time, I had another dog section guy came and joined me, Noddy Noble, who was dog section, and he was my 2IC. He had a couple of successful contacts, and we had a couple of guys wounded. And unfortunately, we couldn't get. Well, there was no choppers available to take the wounded out, so we had to organise that ourselves, which is, as people know, if you're in the bush and you get wounded, you want to come out quickly. You want to know that the people are there to bring you out quickly. And in the unit, most times you actually didn't have that facility. Anyhow, that's another story.
Did you ever witness a Fire Force operation from the top of an OP? Did you actually look down on it? Could you describe one of them for our foreign viewers?
Yeah, sure.
The way the helicopters operate and the men are dropped and so on.
Okay. Okay, we take the one operation in the Chiduka TTL. We're on top of this big goma I was telling you about that the TERS used as a landmark. We observed TERS in this just outside this village in roughly the area which we thought was their camper. We saw the arms and that type of jazz, so we called Fire Force. So what happens is when the Fire Force is maybe about 5-10 minutes out, he actually talks to you and asks you for your location. Sometimes he asks you to pop smoke so he can see your location. On occasion, but very seldom, it might ask you to throw smoke in the direction of where you think the TERS are. But in this occasion, he didn't ask for any of that, because he knew the Gomo and he knew the area quite well, because he'd been there quite a few times. So the Fire Force commander talks to you and asks you what the story is. So you give him the story, you give him roughly the map reference and what it looks like, what you're seeing on the ground. 9 times out of 10, he tries to come behind you so that he flies right over the top of you. And he first you get the K car, which comes in, and the other helicopters, the troop carrying helicopters, the G cars stand off a bit and circle around the outside. The K car then tries to locate the terrorists. He then opens fire, and sitting in the K car is the Air Force commander, who's commanding all the airplanes, including generally a Lynx and a Paradak that accompanies the Fire Force, a big Fire Force. And in the G cars, you've got the trips. There's 4 trips, because that's all they could carry, and each G car's got a gun. In the K car is a 20mm cannon, generally speaking. So the K car comes, the K car opens fire, and then the army commander who's sitting in the KCAR then drops his troops and in stops and where he thinks, and he's then actually in charge of the whole operation. He tells you what the story is. And the hope is that you actually the KCAR drives the goods into the stops, and the stops take out the TERS that way. And that became a very successful operation. And that's how it works.
Yeah, and the Americans used the Lynx aircraft that we used. I forget what they used to call it in America, but it's a push-pull aircraft with a twin boom, and it had a machine gun mounted on top above the pilot, pointing forward. It also had hard points for 60mm SNEB rockets and other goodies. It also had hard points for dropping golf bombs or other bouncies. So it was a very effective weapon, even though it was just a little push-pull aircraft.
Yeah, I think it's a Cessna something. I actually saw a Lynx in action twice. Once in a contact, and once my last contact in the unit. The Lynx was used in the use Fran. It was very successful, and the pilots tended to be very accurate. How they did it, I don't know. Where else? I was sent to where was that place? Nyagena TTL. And Nyagena TTL, which is just south of Fort, or the troop was sent, just south of Fort Victoria. And in that area, I was told that it was the R&R area for the TERS. Just before we were deployed there, about a month before we were deployed there, the Salute Scouts had been in there to try and uplift one of their members' wives and family from the area, and they were ambushed. And I think they lost 4 or 5 Salute Scouts in that ambush. So it wasn't a friendly area at all. I moved in there with also under my command, because the troop commander was on R&R. I was actually on leave. I had Kilo Troop, and so I had 2 troops there, and we deployed into the OPs, and we actually I had 2 OPs overlooking a dip tank, and at this dip tank, the TERS had stopped the locals dipping their cattle. So the reason for dipping cattle, as most people know, is to keep them disease-free. But these poor old locals couldn't dip their cattle. So we actually went down there and got the locals to take all the stones and stuff out of the dip. And my guys in OP and the guys that did that left. And that afternoon, came back and told the locals to fill in the dip tank again. So my 2 OP call signs had long range contacts with these, but nobody won there. And so it was like it was like an R&R area. We actually found trenches outside certain crawls and that type of thing, where the TERS had got the locals to dig trenches and that thing. One of my call signs, a number of my call signs were in OP, and when you finish an OP, you actually send out a train to go and fetch them. And so I sent out 2 hyenas and an RM to uplift these call signs with a stick as support. They uplifted the call signs, and on the way back, unfortunately, the first vehicle was the RM, and the driver from Johnny Stahl, PO Johnny Stahl from John Stahl, from Kilo Troop got hit in the first part of the ambush. The guys returned fire, but it was very heavy fire. They managed to drag Johnny out of the truck. And one of my POs, an NSPO, on his last patrol, grabbed the term mortar that we'd actually captured and we kept, and he pumped off 2 rounds into where we thought the term positions were, and that won the firefight. Although we lost because I had a sergeant wounded and a constable also wounded, but that actually saved them because they were really in the shit. I'm trying to remember the guy's name now. It leaves me, but it was his last patrol, and he finished his NSPO call up, and I'm pretty sure that he was very happy that was his last patrol. But he did exceptionally well.
Now, the hyena vehicle was it was bullet resistant, wasn't it? Did the bullets penetrate part of the vehicle, or how did the guy get injured?
No, he was actually in an RM, driving the RM, but he actually should have been at the back or in the middle, but he actually got himself at the front. So maybe it was because it was too difficult to turn around. I don't know. But he was actually driving the RM, so they just got peppered to hell. Unfortunately, as I said, he died. It was actually only about a K and a half from our base, so this is how much in control these guys were. We got the convoy back again, and I got on the radio to Fort Vic, and I asked for a chopper to come and casevac my 2 injured and take Johan's body away. There was hardly any moon, so, and you know that without moonlight, it's very difficult for choppers to fly because they need to see the ground. I'm not quite sure how it works, but they need moonlight to see. But this pilot that he came with a medic, and it was pitch black. I don't know how he got there, but he did a brilliant job, and we were I was so chuffed that he was able to take the guys out, because that was quite a feat on his part. So he took them back. What else? That was Niagara. Then we moved to a troop, moved to a place called Nyanadzi, which is just south of Hot Springs, on the main Umtali Birchenough Bridge Road, where we had a base of 3 troops. And that was at the time where there was a lot of tourists coming in from Mozambique and going out in that particular area. And we put up OPs, and I was reasonably senior there, and the superintendent, Julian Twine, who was a superintendent in support unit, was reluctant to let me go in the bush, but eventually I twisted his arm, and so I took a call sign, and we took an AK, which we'd captured some time back and never handed in, and some turquoise, and we went into the bush along the Save River. And our sergeant, Chabai Boya was his name, he changed into this kit and went into the crawl to try and see if he could get information, which he did do. He came out and he told us, no, that the tours were supposed to gather at this crawl quite close to Birchenough Bridge. This was all being done at night. So we then moved the call sign towards this crawl, and we got quite close to it, and unfortunately we obviously got seen, and they opened fire on us from the crawl line. We returned fire. It was also quite heavy fire, and it was the sky was alight with tracer going both ways, except fortunately for us, theirs was going quite high. I had a couple of tour rifle grenades, the thin one, I don't know what they call, but it was very thin, and I carried it because they were a lot lighter than the Z45s. So I used that, and I took out a hut which broke the contact. It was quite an amazing sight to see this bloody hut explode in the night. Fortunately, we then swept into the crawl. Fortunately, there were no locals who obviously departed as soon as the firefight started. But we found a couple of blood spots, so I dog legged away from there. for a while and based up for the night. Next morning, I came back, found the spoor and tracked the spoor with myself and one of my trackers, and we followed it across the tarred road, heading towards Mozambique. And for about 10 k's, we came to a crawl line where you arrive in the crawl line and suddenly there's no spoor. It's been swept away. As you know pretty well, that's what happens. So we went in there and my sergeant spoke to them, and fortunately they weren't really tourist supporters, and they were getting a bit tired of supplying the tours with food and the stoppages. And they said yes. About 20 of them had come in there that night, and there was 2 wounded guys, and they left in that direction. So it gave us the direction, so I was able to locate the spoor again. So we carried on following, and we followed them for 15, 20 k's, came across an old used, what looked like an old used tour camp, located at 82 mortar with base plate, plenty of ammunition. I think it was about 6 bombs there. And we thought, hey, no, this is now quite good. Kept on tracking. Made a note of where it was, kept on tracking. Must have gone for another 15, 20 k's. And then all we found was cattle. They'd got the locals to drive the cattle all over the place, and they'd bomb shot. So they obviously knew that we were following them, but that was the end of that trail. I think it must have been good 35 k's, and probably more if 35 k's on the map, certainly, but there's a lot more if you to walk on the ground, because the map doesn't give you ups and downs, does it?
Yeah. As a dog handler, did you ever think, oh man, I wish I had my dogs here at this point? I'm amazed it was never incorporated into the army, actually.
100%. I tell you what, we would have. I would have tracked that night if I had a dog.
Yeah.
My troops wouldn't have liked it, but I could have tracked that night, and certainly the dog probably tracks. So I wasn't the best tracker in the world, that's for sure. But the dog probably tracked about 3 or 4 times faster than I could track. So yeah, there were many occasions where I wished I had a dog. Anyhow, at that place, that's a good story. I discovered at the African butchery in Yetsi that they didn't like fillet, so they would chop the fillet up like stew and this type of thing. So I told them, don't do that, please. And remember, I told you we had to buy our own food.
Yeah.
So I got them the next time they killed a beast to keep the fillet. So they had actually killed 2 beasts and they kept the fillet. It cost me 50 cents a fillet. And so the troop ate well that night on fillet steak.
Fantastic.
Yeah, no, it was fantastic. I had an African sergeant that used to make the best bloody porridge for me. I couldn't handle sudza. It just didn't work for me. But he made great porridge. You would make this porridge with sudza, with a mealie meal, and you would pour in a little bit of condensed milk and bloody a little bit of water, and it would be brilliant.
Whenever we parked alongside an RAR company or something like that, the guys would line up, and it was like a tombola. We were throwing things at each other. We were throwing fish at them, or they were throwing fish at us, and we wanted their packets of sudza and bully beef and stuff. And it was just, it was like watching guys at a circus all throwing stuff to get a doll. It was great fun.
Yeah, I have to admit, I mean, the Africans that I soldiered with were to a large extent brilliant and not scared at all.
Wonderful, brave men, wonderful, and they could see stuff long before we could, you know. And but I did sort of discover that our hearing was better, but their eyesight, you couldn't beat it.
Oh, no, it was brilliant. You know, whilst at this place, whilst I was tracking with that call sign, recovering the mortar, one of my call signs had a sighting of 50 plus tours below him, and called in Fire Force. and it was RLI Fire Force. They had to uplift some kilo troop stops, call signs as stops as well, because it was such a big area. And they actually killed 37 Durs in that action, which was Juliet's, and in fact was the best result I'd ever had from an OP. So I suppose in a way, all those nights spent on the rough ground and then looking at nothing for 6 days, it was worthwhile at the end.
Yeah, it's a pity that look, I really admire the Fire Force guys. They did a very dangerous job. But it's a pity that the OPs and the guys spotting all these guys didn't get more recognition for the kills. You know, have some type of a plaque to say we were part of that scene and the RLI killed 43 or something.
Oh, I can assure you, a lot of the troop commanders in the unit actually claimed those kills, although they were just in OPs. But yeah, I mean, we get a lot. You get a lot of satisfaction, but it's a lot of hard. It was a lot of hard work and quite interesting. As I said, I had some brilliant nights watching the stars. I also learned a hell of a lot about African culture and African way of life, and they my call signs taught me some really beautiful things about the African way of life and that type of thing, which was great.
It's sad that we weren't taught more of their culture for us city boys living in Bambazonke. We didn't know anything about African people. We didn't know anything about their cultures, their language. And I think that was an appalling oversight, really, because they outnumbered us 50-1. We should have learned something about them.
Yeah, you're quite right. Anyhow, that was my 2 years in the unit, because I'd volunteered. You could actually get out you could leave after 18 months and go to a station of your choice. But I spent 2 years there, and then I put in for a transfer to dog training school, funny enough, to train tracking dogs. So I handed over the troop, and at that particular time, the unit was something like about 34 troops, and it was decided that it made a lot more sense if the unit moved from troop strength to company strength. So they formed, what was it, 12, at that stage, 12 companies. And so they had three troops went into one company with its own sergeant. Each troop, funny enough, had its own sergeant major. But that happened at that time as I was about to leave. You know, I get back to base, and we just built a brand new support unit camp at Chikarubi, which was brilliant. It was all new, married quarters, single quarters, black, white, had its own bar, its own hospital, quartermasters, vehicle, pool, armory, the whole trip. So it was quite a fancy place. So I went back, and I was told I had to see Fred Mason, who was number 2 in the unit. He told me that he'd spoken to his mate, the PGHQ officer in charge of transfers, and he'd actually cancelled my application for going back to dogs. And he asked me to actually form the 13th company in the unit, which is HQ company. So I said to him, look, I promised my wife that, 2 years in the unit, 6 weeks in and 10 days out, I promised her I would be home for a while. So I said, well, I guarantee you, Lee, that take this job and you'll have to come and see me to get transferred back to the bush. And funny enough, he kept his word. So I formed the HQ company, which consisted of the ceremonial guard. Those guys used to see guarding the government house and doing all the ceremonial parades to a large extent for the force. It had the barrack guard, which was to guard the whole of Chikarubi, which was a new entity. The ceremonial guard already existed and had its own sergeant major. What else? Well, I had to form the unit police. So the unit police was also brand new. That was to be placed in charge of the detention barracks, which was for the whole of the police force and established in the headquarters company building. what was quite amusing was that I was the only officer in the unit that had an office block to himself. And next to his office was a shower and a toilet. Even the OC of the unit, who was a assistant commissioner, didn't have that. So I was quite pleased about that one. Anyhow, I had also had to form the demo troop, which was supposed to be used to demonstrate to troops new tactics and new things and whatever. I got Ines Masakwa sergeant as my sergeant major for the unit police, who had the police cross for gallantry. Very stern man. He used to come and inspect me each morning to make sure that I was up to standard, which was quite amusing. His officer being inspected by him, but he was a great guy. A hell of a sense of humour. He took over there. The demo trip, when I was running the show, hardly ever did any demos, but they deployed with me to the oil refinery when it got blown up in Salisbury, and we put up stops around the place, but the tours had already gone. I deployed with them in support of Salisbury Province SWAT in the townships when SP got information about tours in the townships. And they also deployed into the bush. And the troop commander was very successful there. He was a bloody good commander. Mike Franklin was his name. He was his SO. And I put him up for a medal for bravery because he was recommended to me by KCON Commando and whatever after one of his successful contacts. But unfortunately, nothing ever came of it. So that was quite well. Yeah, and detention barracks, there wasn't a piece of brass in that whole HQ building that didn't shine. And the floors of the detention barracks were spit and polished. So it was a setup, really a good setup. After 11 months, I said to my wife, I can't handle any more of this, going to Government House and checking out the guards and doing all this admin nonsense. I want to go back to the bush. So I went and saw Fred Mason, and he said, fine. So he gave me a golf company. So I took over golf company, and what happened with golf company, went to Morewa, which was our first base. We did back on OPs in Mangwendi TTL and Uzumba TTL. Had a number of my troops, because I was troop commander. I couldn't get out too much with my troops, but I managed on the occasion. They had a lot of contacts, number 5 force calls. I think I sent you my last 4 months with golf troops logs, which records all the log stats and the contacts and the what's his name.
Certainly a very busy time from what you showed me, all those actual reports. Wow.
Yeah, it was quite busy for us. So SP got some information in Morewa that there was some tours in a crawl line, and so I went out with him with 2 of my constables in his hyena, just the 5 of us. And as we drove into this crawl line, the tours gapped out the other side. So we actually drove back onto the dirt road we were on to try and cut them off, and we saw them coming out the bush. So opened fire. And as we opened fire on them, we hit a landmine with the front right wheel. I think we must have been travelling about 50 k's. And next thing I remember was myself and the SP guy bouncing down the road with this bloody hyena on its side coming towards us. So we grabbed each other and got into the ditch. Fortunately, things stopped before it got to us. And so we waited for subsequent attack, which never happened. And got my guys to come and fetch us, and we Kazavaked Police Reserve Air Wing pilot, Kazavaked the African support unit, African SP sergeant to Salisbury for medical treatment, but he wasn't too badly hurt. But we were actually quite lucky. I've actually still got pieces of that Zumba TTL in my one finger, because I was actually bloody gripping the side of the vehicle as this mine went off. But otherwise, and lost a bit of my hearing. Yeah, from there we went to various other places. Then we were sent to Lapani, which is an area which I didn't know at all. So we went to Lapani and we were told to base up near the Safari Lodge Hotel, yeah. So we based up there to wait for orders, and it was at that time of the peace accords and the peace agreement, and that was being signed. So I spent about 3-4 days driving wanky, looking at game, sitting at the Safari Lodge with the lights on at night, watching the game come down to drink out of the water, thinking, hell, it's costing me nothing. These tourists are paying a fortune to see what I'm seeing for nothing. That was actually brilliant. And then we got told, fine, we had to go to Lapani Police Station, set up a base, and set up. They were established what they called assembly point Mike at Lapani at St Paul's Mission. So I've set up a fire base about 2 k's outside of the base, so that if the Brits that were managing the space ran into problems, they had somewhere to run, and we could give them support. During that time, it was a ceasefire. We had a number of contacts with TERS outside the camp. And then one morning I sent out my guys the uplift call signs. I got a call to go and see the member in charge in the office. I went to see the police member in charge. He told me, no, you must go and set up. I'm going out to see some groups that want to go to the base, and I've been told that they must disarm. So I would like you to just set up a roadblock on this dirt road, which just up from the main Bulawayo to Falls Road. And if they don't disarm, you must use a loud hailer and ask them to get off the bus and disarm. So we went there with my sergeant major, 2 constables that were sick and weary, because that's all I had, apart from my 2 radio operators, and the SB section officer and his sergeant fortunately decided to come with us. So off we went there with the RM and my Land Rover, because that's all I had in base. Set up this ambush. Couldn't hear anything on the radio because, as you well know, having operated in that area, comms is bad. And eventually I got hold of, I was calling and an RAF Hercules came on the air, and he said, can I relay for you? So I said, yeah. So I said, I'm trying to get a hold of this call sign, so-and-so. So he got a hold of him, and I was told, no, the bus had left and it was coming towards my position, and the TERS had refused to disarm. So I was told there was a small RLI fire force quite close by. So I tried to get them, I couldn't. The Hercules relayed that to them, and they started to wind up. And this bus came down the road, and I told my sergeant major to drive the RM across the road, which he did. The bus came within probably about 30 meters of us and stopped. There was a guy on the roof with an RPK or RPD, I'm not sure which. And the bus was full. Now, this bus had been hired to particularly move these guys, and so there was no civilians on the bus at all. So the SB sergeant shouted at them through the loud hailer to please get off the bus and lay their arms down, as they did. And the next minute, a guy with the RPD opened fire on the roof at us. We returned fire. I was then in comms with the fire force. We were pretty damn close then. So I told him what the story was during the firefight, and he told me to withdraw. So we withdrew, and whilst we were withdrawing, probably about 200 meters from the bus, this lynx came and dropped a Fran, which went right down the side of the bus and missed. And he circled, came back again, and then hit the bus with a second Fran. So that was my first view of Fran at close quarters. I'd seen it dropped in contacts, but not that close.
Good. That's an incident very few people know about.
Oh, they've actually, if you read the information, they actually commemorate that day, or CIPRA commemorated that day, and the story is told that there were 7 terrorists on the bus that were on this bus with the civilians. The army stopped the bus and got the people off the bus and slaughtered the terrorists. And the terrorists didn't return fire because they were scared of hitting the civilians. I can assure you that that's actually recorded in history.
Yeah,
actually,
Satan's the father of lies. Hey?
Yeah, sure. So that was the story there. Fire Force dropped its stops. They killed 7, and that was the 7 that I was talking about. And that was my last contact in the support unit. I'd resigned from the force, and so I handed over my troop, funny enough, to another dog handler, Pete Hornay, ex-dog handler, and he took over golf, and I went back to support unit headquarters, and I spent my last 3 months as the unit chief inspector, and then departed to South Africa.
Wow. Gee, Lee, what a fascinating story. Very, very interesting. One question I'd like to ask you is, did the families of the African troops in support unit get brought into the base camps like they did with the scouts to keep them away from terrors?
Yes, Chikurebi Barracks, the support unit Chikurebi Barracks, was specifically built for all the African troops.
Okay.
The married and single quarters for white officers was also there as well. But I think there was only about 5 or 6 houses there. But they had barracks for all the troops that weren't married, and they had married quarters for all the Africans there. They had one saying in the unit which I have to tell you about, and it goes like this: you don't have to be mad to join the support unit. We'll teach you.
Oh, excellent. Lee, on that note, I think we're going to end the talk. It's been really stimulating and interesting. I've learned a few aspects about things that I've never known before. And I'd like to thank you for coming on board. And if you can recommend anybody else to come and talk on the program, I'd love that. And I would like to end off by appealing once more to all the viewers who've had experience in the Rhodesian security forces, male, female, whatever, or even farmers who went through a tough time or anything related to the war. We're very keen to interview you. My email address is somewhere on this program. And please remember to subscribe, hit the plus button, and please do become a Patreon to help out John. That's very much appreciated. Lee, thank you very much indeed. And I'll say goodbye to you.
Tony, thanks very much for giving me the opportunity to talk, and for all the good work that you've done with your colleagues in laying down the history in visual for the people in the future. One thing I'd like to add, otherwise I would be remiss by not doing it. The roll of honour, the support unit lists 99 names,
Wow.
and that's quite a lot of people.
Yeah, sure.
Tony, thank you very much.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for coming on board, and God bless you, Lee.
Okay, thanks a lot.